Dan, how you doing, buddy? I love this. This is so nice. I really like it. Let me go play with the band here sometime.
Are you in a band?
Well, I've been in bands. They've never paid us anything, but I'll get up and sing. I'll sing. And again, I don't charge. That's why people say, "Oh, you sound good." I said, if I charge you $10, you might be more critical.
Hello. Am I good? Okay, everybody, thank you all so much for joining us here in person in Austin today, and thank you to everyone who's joining us live online. We know you had some rain scattered here and there, so I appreciate you taking the time to be here with us. We have a very important discussion today. This is the #1 issue in the nation, as it should be. And so I am very grateful to have this panel up here and have all of you joining us. So get comfy, dig into your Chick-fil-A, and we're going to have a wonderful discussion. Kicking that off, I'd like to first introduce our panelists. So my name is Selene Rodriguez. I am the campaign director here for our Secure and Sovereign Texas Initiative, which is our border security and immigration campaign. I am joined today by Representative Richard Raymond, here next to me, who represents House District 42. He was born in Alice, Texas, and raised in Benavides, and he has a BA and JD from UT Austin. So sorry, sir, but there's a lot of Aggies in here. Don't take it personally. He serves as a captain in the Texas State Guard and represents Laredo, Texas, along the Texas-Mexico border. He was first elected to the House of Representatives in 1992 and serves on the State Affairs Committee, Sustainable Property Tax Relief Select Study Committee, and the Ways and Means Committee. So please give a hand to our panelist, Representative Raymond. I am also joined by my colleague, Ammon Blair, who is a senior fellow here at TPPF. Before joining us, he left 10 years in the United States Border Patrol, where during that he was also in the U.S. Army, where he served as an enlisted soldier and a commissioned officer. He has served in various leadership and staff positions, including as an infantry platoon leader on Operation Lone Star, which is our state's border mission. Please give a round of applause for Ammon. So we do have kind of a unique and interesting panel up here. Ammon serving in the Army and the Texas Army National Guard, Representative Raymond as a captain in the State Guard, and I am proud to represent our Devil Dogs in the Marine Corps. Thank you. Additionally, we all call the border home. So this topic is very important to us. It's not just defending our state, it's defending our own home. So we're thankful that you're here with us today. So kicking us off, we're going to be focusing on Secure and Sovereign Texas' top 2 research projects that we've been working on this year and that we hope to continue our work on in the upcoming legislative session. That is basically all coming around bolstering our Texas state defenses, our Texas military department, our Texas law enforcement agencies, and how we can best equip them and resource them to do the very tough job of protecting our state at our border. Starting with that, we want to kick it into kind of the idea of a Texas border force or a Texas law enforcement unit. We saw this represented last year with House Bill 20. That didn't make it, but parts of it were put into House Bill 7, which you were a co-author for with Chairman Guillen.
Joint author.
A joint author. It's on.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Joint author, which is the difference. More important, right, Stan? All right.
So we saw kind of little parts of a Texas border force put into a few different bills that all kind of bounce between the House and the Senate. So before we get into that, Ammon, can you set the stage for us and tell us what is Operation Lone Star, who is involved, and what's the mission?
Sure. This is on?
Yes.
Yeah, I just can't hear it myself. All right, so Operation Lone Star. So in the beginning of the Biden administration, we started seeing a surge of illegal immigration between the ports of entry. And at that time, we did have soldiers already on the border. But given the current circumstances and also a few invasion declarations, a few counties declaring an emergency, the governor created Operation Lone Star to create a joint task force between the Texas Military Department and then also the Texas Department of Public Safety. And this joint operation was to stop the flows of mass migration between the ports of entry.
And with that, sir, if you could please tell us what has been the legislative response to the situation at our border?
What has been in the Texas legislature?
Yes, how has the Texas legislature aimed to address the situation that we've been facing?
Well, I mean, I think he kind of sort of briefly went over it, but the response has been that we set up Operation Lone Star, right? And if you follow it at all, you know, it's kind of a split where, you know, most Democrats don't support Operation Lone Star, most Republicans do, and some Democrats support it, some don't. And, you know, I think that part of, for me, on this immigration issue for forever has been to get at the heart of what causes this mass migration or illegal immigration. It's been going on for forever, right? Certainly has been in the news more in the last 2-3 years, I would say. But you look at the numbers going back to, I mean, every president since Reagan, I suppose. And trying to get at the heart of how we can change that flow, right? How many of you remember Newt Gingrich? Raise your hand if you remember Newt Gingrich. So I noticed some didn't raise their hands. Well, Newt Gingrich was the Speaker of the House, a Republican Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives. Got elected in 1995, and I was already in office, right? So anyway, but when he left office, I remember watching a speech that he gave on C-SPAN. Believe it or not, I watched C-SPAN back then. And he gave a speech at a university, and they took questions, and they asked him how he thought you would stop illegal immigration. And I guess he felt free to answer, you know, now that he was no longer in office, very honestly. And he said, you know, if you go to a business in the United States and you find that they've hired someone who's here illegally and you fine them $10,000, then the second time, if that same business hires someone else who's here illegally, you fine them $25,000. He said, and if they do it a third time, hire someone else who's here illegally, you fine them $50,000. He said, that is how you stop illegal immigration. And it never, you know, that never left me because it got to the heart of it, right? Which is, I've said this many times, that I think every piece of evidence shows the overwhelming number of people who come to this country illegally come here because United States citizens are giving them jobs. United States citizens are giving them jobs. So what I like to do when I get into almost any issue, maybe every issue, is to try to talk common sense and to try to talk about, you know, not political rhetoric, but getting to the heart of the issue. If we had legal immigration, we wouldn't have illegal immigration. It wouldn't be as big a problem. So, you know, what we also know, as I understand it, I mean, we could do what Newt Gingrich said, is go put a bunch of businesses out of business, because that's what would happen, right? You'd put them out of business because either you fine them too much or they don't have the employees to do the work that they need to do, right? And I bet if I asked for a show of hands in here, I'm not going to, but if I did, does anyone here know anyone who's ever hired someone who's here illegally? I bet a bunch of hands would go up. But apparently we do it because that's what our economy requires, right? We're a growing economy. We need employees. You can't get enough employees. We have legally the H-1B visa program, right? Which is if a company has jobs, sort of higher end jobs, and they advertise and U.S. citizens don't want those jobs for whatever reason, then someone can get an H-1B visa. They have to have essentially an undergraduate degree or equivalent experience, and they come and they get that job. And it's a visa. It's a work visa. So we should expand the work visa program to what we need in this country to meet our needs in terms of our workforce. If we do that, first of all, you will have a tremendous drop in illegal immigration. And then importantly, I think what that does is free up our law enforcement to go after more drug interdictions, right? Because obviously that's a big issue, and I know that being on the border. So I think what you've seen in the legislature, the state legislature, is a frustration, right, that not enough is being done by Washington, in that we have not passed any significant immigration reform since 1986, you know, again, under Reagan. And he gave amnesty to everybody, right? And he's a Republican, right? So I think that what you've seen here in the State House is a frustration that Washington hasn't done enough, either party. So consequently, you have Operation Lone Star. You know, I have voted for every bit of the funding that we've had, because I believe that we should be doing something. And by the way, I've written legislation. I'm sure Stan will joint author it next year. I've written legislation that directs the controller of the state of Texas to submit a bill to the United States Congress for us to be reimbursed for every bit of that money that we've spent on border protection, and that if they don't pay it, it directs the Attorney General to sue the federal government to pay us all that money back, okay? So I feel very strongly that, you know, even though we've done this, that the Congress and the U.S. government should have been doing more. But again, you know, we can keep doing this here, and I don't think it's going to do a whole lot, right, to stop the problem until we get to the core of the problem, which is people are coming here because United States citizens are giving them jobs. And if we don't get to that part, we can double what we do in Operation Lone Star, but they're going to come anyway. And so one of the things that I'm working, and Matt is here for Chairman Guillen, you know, I work with him, of course, on this type of legislation. But I feel like what we should do is take the what we call FTEs, full-time equivalents, jobs, positions, right, that we are funding in the National Guard, the State Guard, DPS, and turn that into, if we're going to do it, then let's do it right. Let's hire people that are trained law enforcement. Let's hire them for those positions. The National Guard and the State Guard is not trained to be law enforcement. That's not what we are. That's not what he was. You know, that's not what you need the National Guard for. But if we're going to do it, then let's do it right. Let's hire people who have law enforcement training. That's what I believe. That's one of the changes I think that we should move toward, right? But it just I think what you've seen here is a frustration at the state level where we want to do something. But looking at it, I go, well, we can keep doing it, but we really need the U.S. Congress and the White House to do more, and I hope it's significant. But I also think that it gets to that whole issue about the workforce.
Thank you for that answer, sir. And to allude to what you were saying with the law enforcement issue, like I said earlier, House Bill 20, that was kind of like the big messaging bill that everybody paid attention to until it died.
Yeah.
And I think it's very easy for people across the state to kind of get lost in those bigger bills and then not really be able to understand all the other things in the smaller bills.
Right.
So House Bill 7, that actually made it out of the House, into the Senate, back to the House.
Right.
And that took a lot of parts of other types of legislation.
Right.
So including it had a Texas border force. So
Right.
what are some of the differences, and could you tell us in the legislature specifically, how were you trying to approach that kind of goal, and what were the obstacles in the legislature to achieve it?
Man, I mean, obstacles, again, you have some members that are just, that will say, and I think it's a legitimate argument, this is not a state, immigration is not a state issue. It really isn't. I mean, you know, it isn't. It's a federal issue. And so they need to be doing more. So you'll have legislators that are going to say they're not for any of this because it's something that needs to be done at the federal level. And that's legitimate, and I get that. Having said that, again, you know, some of us feel like, okay, well, if they're not doing enough, then if we can do something, then we'll do something, or at least we'll try. And so again, I think we were trying to get to the point where we can do something that has more of an impact. If we're going to do something, there were many members, many Republicans, you know, and certainly some Democrats that felt like what we'd done up to now, we were spending a lot of money, but it wasn't very effective, right? And so trying to figure out if we could do something else. And one of the things that I believe is that, again, if we're going to do something that's law enforcement related and we're talking about the border, then we should be doing more specifically working with local law enforcement, whether it's a police department, like in my case in Laredo, or the sheriff's departments. And I would tell you, for example, and I'm always careful about this stuff because this is going out into the, you know, where people can hear all this, but, you know, there's a big difference between Laredo and Nuevo Laredo in terms of safety. And that difference is law enforcement, right? The Laredo Police Department do a great job of keeping Laredo safe. And we spend a lot of money in Laredo, local dollars, to keep Laredo safe. And that's the difference. That, you know, from Laredo to Nuevo Laredo, I don't go into Nuevo Laredo. I haven't for many years. And so law enforcement is the reason that it's safer. So if we're going to do something border related and we're going to spend dollars on it, then we should be working more and partnering more with local law enforcement because they know the communities, they know the terrain, they know the areas, they know the border, the sheriff's departments, same thing. And so we should be doing more partnering with them, whether it's, if we're going to spend money for the next 2 years, because we passed 2-year budgets, on that's going to be used for full-time equivalents for people that you hire, then we should hire more sheriff's department deputies. We should hire more police officers. When Bill Clinton was president, he passed 100,000 boots on the ground, 100,000 new police officers to put on the streets in America. He started that. That was a good idea. It's still a good idea, right? That's what we should be doing. We should allow, in my opinion, the National Guard to be prepared with what he was in the military, he was in the Army for 22 years, to be prepared to do what they're supposed to do, which is go fight in foreign wars. And if we're going to spend money, I think we ought to spend it on people that are trained to do law enforcement.
Thank you for that answer, sir. Ammon, going over to you, when you talk about a border force, we've seen a few news articles released. We heard in a recent Senate Border Security hearing the mention of a Texas tactical border force. So I think some people are kind of wondering, oh, we did it, but we never heard about that. So can you explain to our audience, what is the Texas tactical border force and what are they responsible for?
Sure. So the Texas Tactical Border Force is nothing more than a group of soldiers, all of them, for the most part. Most of the soldiers that are currently in Operation Lone Star are volunteers. And so it's a group of volunteers from all different types of companies in groups within the Texas Military Department that got together, and they were assigned to be a quick reaction force. They're not specially trained. They are just your regular National Guardsmen who was assigned to this unit to address certain situations where there's a high amount of mass migration. For example, their first really big mission was Title 42. We thought that there was going to be a massive surge of Haitians coming across, like in Anzalduas Bridge. At that time, I was a Border Patrol agent. And so I was underneath the bridge for Border Patrol, and we were actually pushed back. We were forced back. And the Texas Tactical Border Force, or the National Guard soldiers, were actually forward deployed on the river, just in case. So they were also in Brownsville. If you see the videos from Todd Bensman, he shows exactly what the soldiers were doing back then. They were just pushing back. They were putting up a concertina wire and pushing people back. So it is not a border force. It is your regular National Guard soldier who's given a certain amount of training in regards to civil disobedience and civil disturbance, and that's it. It's nothing special, just a quick reaction force to be deployed across our 1,254 miles of border.
And with that, both of you had mentioned, more law enforcement, when used properly to do the job that they're actually trained to do, is a positive thing. So Colonel McGraw from Texas DPS testified recently in Senate Border Security saying wherever you have more troopers, more trained law enforcement, you have a safer community. Where you have less, which we have to pull troopers off of their jobs in their communities to bring them down to the border mission, when you have less troopers there, it means a less safe community. So I completely agree with what both of you are saying in having a law enforcement unit dedicated to that training and that mission. But with that, I also think that we should be equipping our law enforcement to be able to do that job. And part of that goes into kind of the crime statistics reporting and how much they're able to do to combat that kind of crime. So Ammon, something you talk about a lot with legislators is that issue. Can you explain what the crime reporting problems are there?
Yes. Yeah. So right now, the only way we can measure security along the border, by DHS's definition, security is based off of three metrics, and that's apprehensions, turnbacks, and gotaways. That is it. It's all immigration related. And that was not codified in law until 2017 under the National Defense Authorization Act. Then also in terms of crime reporting, the crime reporting was actually created in about 1929. It's called the Uniform Crime Report. And now, fast forward today, it's now the National Incident-Based Reporting System. Though that crime reporting system does not take into effect the Mexican cartels, transnational criminal organizations, the CCP, smuggling operations, drug trafficking operations, anything cartel related, or now, significantly, the Tren de Aragua, the gang that is coming up from Venezuela. all that stuff and all of their operations are actually not tracked. So when DPS publishes this report of, hey, this is our crime report, they just published a new one on May 31st. And it shows the crime reporting along the border, or what is border crimes. It's only going to be those crimes that the FBI designates it as such. So all the smuggling that you're seeing on the border, all the trafficking, all the bailouts, that is not included in the crime reporting. And so right now, we don't have a system in place right now, both federally and also at the state, to gather the metrics in order for us to understand what is actually happening.
From there, that's kind of like the law enforcement aspect of everything. And so another part of the research that we're conducting here, Operation Lone Star, the border mission as a whole has always been law enforcement and military. So going into the side of the Texas Military Department, which both of you have very extensive experience in, a lot of people, I guess, don't understand that we have a Texas Military Department and what all that means. So starting off, Ammon, with you, could you briefly explain what is the Texas Military Department?
Sure. So you have active duty Army, Air Force, Marines, and Navy, and also Coast Guard, and then you also have a reserve force. So the reserves are broken up into two sections. You have the Army Reserves, which is federally funded and also federally commanded. So it's commanded by the federal government or Department of Defense. Then you have the National Guard, which is dual status. So these National Guard in each state has two commanders. They have the commander which is currently our president, Joe Biden, and then you also have a commander here in Texas, which is Governor Greg Abbott. So when you sign into the National Guard, you're swearing an oath to both the state and the federal government. And so that's the Texas Military Department. And then also to include that is the State Guard. The State Guard itself is state-funded and state-controlled. It has nothing to do with the federal government.
And Representative Raymond, I've sat through a few state affairs hearings with you late into the night and debating border security and strengthening those defense forces. And I've heard you say multiple times, and I'm very grateful for your leadership on this, where you always ask people that are there, it's okay if you want to come express your opinion, but we need solutions. I need to hear from your community and your perspective, how can you work on fixing these problems? And so you've always been such a leader in fostering bipartisan discussion, and we're very grateful to you for that. You actually filed a handful of bills over the past few sessions regarding the Texas Military Department, military installations in our state. Specifically, last session, you had House Bill 566, which was to require a disaster preparedness study for all of our military bases. And I mention these things because I don't want us as Texans to not think about the small details that make up the larger picture of success. And if there's anything I think everybody in this room can agree on, it's that we want our military to have all the resources that they need, the funding, the training, the gear, and those are some issues that we can get into later, but I think we have to remember that there's a lot of small actions that go into the big action. So can you explain what are some of those actions you tried to take to protect and strengthen our military forces in the state?
Well, certainly anything that we can do to help the National Guard and the State Guard, which we can affect at the state level. But for example, with reference to disaster readiness, we have a lot of military bases in the state of Texas, and I wish I believed that there will never be any more terrorist attacks on this country, but I don't believe that. I think that we will. There are too many what we call soft targets out there. And if you want to be strategic, you go do something to military base, right? Or either a natural disaster or a man-made disaster. And I just feel like one of the things that has happened in the legislature is, a few years ago we started saying, if any bill that said study, just kill it. If it said study, just kill it. Well, it's never good to paint with a broad brush. Take a look at the bill. If it's a dumb study, then don't do it. But if it's a good study, do it, right? There are some things that the only way you prepare is to look at a situation and say, what do we do if something happens here? And if it's important enough, like our military bases, then we should be prepared. Okay, what do we do? What are the actions that we take if something happens here? If I see it in Laredo, for example. We're now in Laredo, the busiest port in America. We have more trade coming through the port of Laredo than any port in America. That includes New York, LA, any port, right? And so on occasion, we will get a bomb threat for the World Trade Bridge. Now, if a bomb went off on the World Trade Bridge, it would, you want to affect security in this country? Because all the trucks that are coming in with trade going south or trade going north, you know, if you stop that or alter that in any significant way, that will have a tremendous impact on our security. And similarly, that's what I was looking at with with our military bases, is that we have to be prepared in case something happens. We can react quickly and move on and be prepared for why somebody did what they did, or what, again, if it was natural or man-made. That's where I was coming from with that, with reference to that. And so, you know, I mean, I want us, I hope that we at the state level can do things, and I know you're going to be coming up with some you were mentioning before we started, some reports that I think are going to be very helpful. But there are some things that we can do, and this is about security. Look, I almost don't need to see statistics. I'd like to see them, sure, report, but to know that there's a lot of bad stuff going on with human smuggling, with drug smuggling, with cartels. You know, I remember MS-13, Mara Salvatrucha. MS-13, have you all heard that? That was El Salvador. I mean, I can remember a few years ago, my office is on the first floor, and there's, you know, where the elevators are, there's a bathroom right next to the elevator, well, men's and women's bathroom. And my chief of staff went in there one day, and they had tagged it. This is before the metal detectors went up. They had tagged it, MS-13, the bathroom right around the corner on the first floor of the Capitol from my office. And I said, man, these dudes, like they want, hey guys, we're here. We want you to know we're here, and we're here in the Capitol. I'll never forget that. So I know all these things are going on, and so we should do what we can do to help. You know, to me, crime is a bigger issue. I've already told you how I think we should address immigration. I wish the Congress would do something about that. I think it makes good common sense. Let's bring in a workforce as we need it. Then it frees up our law enforcement to go after the really bad guys. Not the people that want to come and work in hotels or in construction or want to work in restaurants. I'm not worried about those people. If they're coming for jobs where we need them to fill, I'm not worried about them. But I'm worried about all those other guys that are involved in human smuggling, that are involved in drug smuggling, that are involved in these transnational gangs, where they're recruiting U.S. citizens, by the way, to be part of those gangs, because they don't have to deal with so much with the issue of being a citizen and getting past border checkpoints and so forth. That stuff goes on. That's the real world. And that's where I think we need to be focused on more, if we can address the labor force immigration issue more effectively. Let me also throw something else out there, by the way, that I haven't said publicly, but I will for the first time here. And I'm sure some people will get mad at me. But for example, with reference to illegal immigration, and so many people that come in now and put in a claim of asylum, right? You know, I've said, hey, you want to make a change that would be, I think, significant? Tell people, look, if you want to apply for asylum, with this new law that they pass up in Washington, it'll say, you go apply at the U.S. Embassy in your country. Apply at the U.S. Embassy in your country. And I can get you judges to go spend 6 months at a time, go work in that country, and hear the cases there at the embassy. You do that, and you're going to have a lot less asylum cases. Because as we see now, most of them, certainly overwhelming number of the asylum cases are not, you know, they don't qualify, right? But by the time they actually have a hearing, they don't qualify. So I say, let's just do them at their country of origin, right? So there are things like that that are common sense, man, in my opinion, that we could do that could help stem that illegal immigration and then free up our law enforcement to do what we ought to be doing, which is going after the bad guys.
Thank you for that, sir. And I definitely agree there. I want our law enforcement focused on the job that they signed up to do. Mm-hmm. So with that, going back to you, Ammon, in the hearing that we were at last week, TMD testified that they, going specifically to the Texas State Guard of the 3 branches of the military department, they have 317 State Guard personnel on state active duty orders on Operation Lone Star. Now, you know, we've both served in active duty. Sir, you've been on the State Guard. we completely understand that there is a lot of jobs that all have to be done, and all of those jobs go towards keeping the military functioning. But when asked about what are these 317 State Guard doing on the border mission, we were informed that they do specialty work that includes making sure that the water's working and that the toilets are flushing, and that they help set up a new pay system. While important, I've read some of your research that you're working on the history of the State Guard. And if you could just tell us, why is that not really fulfilling the mission constitutionally as to why the State Guard was created?
Yeah, great question. So if everyone knows, the Constitution created the militia, right? And so that militia was there to set up a Homeland Defense force for each state, right? And so fast forward to now, you have the Dick Act of 1903, where it kind of started that federalization of the National Guard. The National Guard today is no longer that militia that we were talking about. The National Guard is now a completely operational Federal Reserve. Okay, so you saw that NGB came out with a statement the other day stating that, hey, we don't think that the National Guard is utilized on the border very well. They should be focused on overseas contingency operations. So therein lies, well, if the National Guard then is a federalized reserve, then where is our militia? That is the State Guard. And unfortunately, we have reduced them to handing out water, to doing menial tasks to assist National Guard that is currently on the border. Now, there are certain guardsmen that are actually working the Border Security Operations Center in Camp Mabry. And they're there watching Operation Drawbridge. If you guys don't know that, back in the early 2000s, the Texas DPS created a system because the federal government wasn't doing their job back then. And so the state created a system where they had these hunting cameras, and they placed them alongside with Border Patrol. Border Patrol also works with DPS on this, and they place them in areas where there's a lot of smuggling going on along the border. And so these systems are all interconnected, and the images go up into the Border Security Operations Center. And there's a kid there. I call him a kid now because I'm old, but there's a kid, a state guardsman sitting there, and he's watching these images, and then we'll flag them if it's any smuggling activity or any illicit activity going on. And then it's sent also to the Border Patrol TOC and also DPS, and now to the phones. You now have an app. DPS created an app where each Border Patrol agent and also DPS trooper now has access to those images. And so the State Guard is utilized there doing that. But for the most part, unfortunately, the state of Texas no longer has a traditional militia that was originally set up for Homeland Defense, and unfortunately, we're kind of left in the dark in regards to security for our citizens.
Is there a state that has that militia that you talk about?
There is. So Florida recently, Governor DeSantis, he saw what was happening here in Texas specifically in regards to the security efforts and the problems that we're having with Operation Lone Star, and then also the problems we're having with the federal government. And Governor DeSantis in the state of Florida looked at all the models before and looked back into World War II. During World War II, if you guys remember, or if you don't, the State Defense Force in Texas was actually larger than the Texas National Guard. And so they looked at all these models on how they can secure the state of Florida. And they went back to World War II and said, you know what? We're going to take that same model that Florida took during World War II, and we're going to bring it back to today, where it no longer falls under the National Guard Bureau. It no longer falls under the Department of Defense or the federal government. It falls directly under Governor DeSantis. And because of that, the amount of funding, the modernization process, you name it, they're getting everything that our state guardsmen wish they had. And in fact, for the first time in unknown as to when, I'm not sure, I'd have to look, but there on our border today, we don't just have other National Guard soldiers. We actually have Florida State Guard soldiers on our border.
And is that the first time that another state's State Guard has deployed to help another state in their mission?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to have one more thing, and then I'm going to bring it back to you, Representative. But Ammon, something I've noticed as here at TPPF we're doing this research is we have read almost every study under the sun on the Texas Military Department because we want to know absolutely everything, and that's because within this agency, things change daily. So what I've noticed, though, is a lot of those recommendations and the problems identified from before I was born or in my early years, haven't quite been addressed. One of those, alluding to what you just said, is the department does not provide sufficient attention and oversight to its state administration functions and state employees. It would benefit from stronger institutional structures to ensure requirements are not lost beneath more pressing and variable federal and military concerns. And that's something that you and I have kind of talked about. So how can, like, if in one day they said, how would you fix this one problem? What is a way that we could approach that?
It's going to be working through representatives in addressing pay and benefits parity. So as it stands right now, just administratively, if we want to talk about that. So right now, when a National Guard soldier is currently on Operation Lone Star, they're only covered for insurance during their work duty hours. Now, when you are a state employee, your work hours are 8 to 10 hours a day. But when you're a soldier, your work hours are 24/7. And so unfortunately, when they're off duty, they still have federal requirements like training and medical readiness requirements and dental readiness requirements. All these requirements that are placed upon them by the federal government in order to be part of the National Guard, a lot of commanders are very reluctant in doing so because they're no longer covered for insurance purposes. Therefore, if they get injured, they're doing physical fitness to maintain their physical fitness or to train for their upcoming deployment, and they get injured, they're not covered. And so a lot of commanders on the border right now are not conducting training because they're not willing to assume that risk. And so that's one of those state examples because they're looked at right now as just a temporary state employee. Therefore, they don't get the same pay and benefits as like a DPS trooper would on Operation Lone Star.
Thank you for that explanation. And I think it's important that we continue to bring those types of problems. And so, Representative, something I've noticed in many of the conversations we have with people across the state is they think that fixing or helping things that pertain to the military department is only at the discretion of the governor, and the governor does a lot of work to protect and equip our military with what they need. But I don't think a lot of people understand that the legislature can also take steps towards making sure that they have funding or personnel, like you mentioned, and how they're trained, benefits. I know the last session you did a lot of work on the parity issue. Benefits, something specifically I saw you tried to do was retirement status and making sure that Texas State Guard, I didn't know this, when you retire from the Texas State Guard, you are actually not considered a retiree of the Texas military. Is that the case?
That's right.
So what are some actions as far as protecting our state military that the legislature can do that we should be looking forward to or helping and supporting as you guys look into those types of things?
Well, again, I think that specifically with reference to the State Guard, you mentioned a lot of, I think the difference is national and state. So I think at the state level, the governor really doesn't have the governor has the authority to deploy, right? But he doesn't pass the legislation that affects, for example, a State Guard member has to buy his own uniform, or again, whether your service as a State Guard member could go towards your retirement years that you had in the military. A lot of members who were in the State Guard were in the military before, right? And so I just think there are things like that we could sort of show our appreciation more with reference to the State Guard. And I think, again, you started talking about it. I know you'll come out with more detailed sort of suggestions later, but I do think that we should make the distinction about the fact that the National Guard is the National Guard, the State Guard is the State Guard, and that anything that we're going to do to utilize the State Guard requires a commitment by the legislature to recognize their value and where we need them to be deployed more and rely less on the National Guard, because the National Guard, again, has to be prepared to be deployed abroad. And I mean, if you haven't noticed, there's so much going on around the world, I guess there always is, that you just never know what's going to happen tomorrow or the next day, right? And if they had to be deployed tomorrow, they're gone. And all we've got to count on with reference to continuing Operation Lone Star, about 1,300 DPS troopers, and then at that point, I don't know how many State Guard would be deployed. But the state legislature has to decide what we're going to do to make sure, as someone once said, they're not treated as a redheaded stepchild. You know, poor redheads out there. I'm sure they're not all. I'm sure not all stepchildren are redheads, but or treated poorly. But it's working with them and figuring out what can we do in the legislature to help you guys be prepared and to do more, and to make it to where, because it is voluntary, to where we can attract more people to come and join the State Guard. I mean, I got in, I wanted to do something to help, right? I was, I'd aged out to go into, active combat abroad, so I couldn't get into the Army, or to the armed forces. So I wanted to do something in helping, and I joined the State Guard. And a lot of members, as I said, who are in the State Guard now wanted to continue their service that they had started in the military, in the armed forces. But I think that we need to do more to recruit. And you recruit more by showing people we appreciate them and that they're going to have a meaningful role. So we got to decide in the legislature what we can do to do that, whether it's uniforms, whether it's pay, whether it's retirement, whether it's just taking care of them,
Well, thank you for trying to be one of the ones taking care of them, sir. We have a few minutes before we have to go to Q&A. So Ammon, you mentioned this earlier, and sir, you just alluded to this. The chief of the National Guard Bureau said this week that having our National Guard members on our border detracts from our military mission and underutilizes troops. And what he was trying to say in public testimony was, as the National Guard Bureau, we don't want them on the border long term. Initially, that made me very much enraged. I can only think, why wouldn't you want to be serving on the border? But you said some things to me that made me see it in another way. So I'd love for you to share that, because I think it's important that we get perspectives of both sides.
Sure. So when you join the Army or Army National Guard, your job, for the most part, like here in Texas, we have 36 Infantry Division. So in the National Guard, there are more infantry divisions or combat related arms or military occupation specialties or jobs than there are in active duty. And so when you're tasked as an infantry soldier who has been trained to close with and destroy the enemy, and you're then tasked to go to the border to hand out bottles of water, to do migrant care, to do transportation, and to babysit, you're seeing it as you now no longer have the opportunity to prepare for what you signed up to do. You signed up to be an infantry soldier to fight wars and to protect the society, and now you're being sent to do this. Now, like I said before, the State Guard, just like in the State Guard, the Border Security Operations Center, they are monitoring images from drawbridge. And the National Guard that are currently on federal orders are monitoring camera systems inside of Border Patrol TOCs or the Tactical Operations Centers. So they are monitoring camera systems and also some surveillance towers, but for the most part, they are not doing anything related in terms of their jobs. And so as a military person, they don't want to come down here. They see it as a waste of time. Now, if they were to switch the mission to one of not just facilitating the mass migration or to assist Border Patrol, but to actually try to counter and defeat the transnational criminal organizations, the foreign terrorist organizations like the cartel or the CCP that is coming through. If they were to transition from facilitation of the invasion to actual national security mission, then it would be completely different. And I bet you would have a different response from the Chief of the National Guard Bureau.
Thank you for that answer. We're going to take a few minutes now before we close to go over to questions from the audience.
I want to say something about that. Could I?
Yes, sir, absolutely.
So again, we're, in my view, it is not the most effective way for us to get into a military sort of battle with folks coming through the border. Again, if we want to invest, and I've said this before, and I'm going to keep saying it, even though I voted for the funding, but I think we can use the funding more effectively. You want to go after bad guys, you want to do something on the border, do it with people that are trained law enforcement. That's going to be more effective. I promise you it will be more effective than having the National Guard. It just will. So, we can talk about now, you want to change the mission of the National Guard to where you're going to get into, a military battle with Mexico or whoever's on the border coming in from Mexico. That's what we're talking about, the Mexican border. That's a whole different deal. And by the way, if we jumped into that, tried to jump into that at the state level, the president's going to back them off immediately. We're not going to get into a military, in my view, not going to get into a military battle on the border. That's not going to happen. So what we can do is get into a law enforcement battle on the border by taking the money that we're using for these positions and using them to hire people that are law enforcement trained. That will be more effective, I think.
Well, within our team here at TPPF, we have a lot of ideas on how to do that. So I promise you, sir, we're going to work with you on that, and thank you for your leadership on that issue. Moving on into some Q&A, we have mics here in both corners, so just raise your hand if you have a question.
Good afternoon. Thank you for this very much. This question is for either of you. Is the state of Texas able to work with Mexico at all, whether this is the Mexican federal government or Mexican local authorities, to secure our common borders?
To secure, say that again?
Our common borders?
Our common borders? Well, I think you all, if you'll recall, was it a year or a year and a half? I forget how long ago, where Governor Abbott signed these agreements with the border governors, right? I think they were, I don't think they were very effective because we're talking about international relations, and the reality is we're a state. And so when you get into international treaties or agreements, it's got to be between the countries, ergo the federal government, right? So I think you can probably do some things. We try, like in Laredo, our city is working with their city, and we try to talk to each other, and they sort of tell us of some of the criminal activity, tell our police guys, and so we're kind of on the lookout. I guess there could be some things, I don't know exactly what that is, but I guess there could be some things. It's just that I know that Governor Abbott tried it. Do y'all remember that? He had these sort of high-profile signings, and but they weren't very. I'm trying to be nice. I don't know how effective they were, because at the end of the day, if you're going to have agreements between countries, it's got to be done at the national level.
And then, just to caveat off that, also you're working with a level of corruption that's not seen in a lot of parts in the world, and so we would do patrols as a Border Patrol agent along with Sedena or the Mexican Marines along the border. Like if cartels were coming up north onto the border, we would work in tandem and do patrols while they were doing a patrol on the south side. We were doing a patrol with them. But knowing full well that more than likely someone on their patrol is also a member of the cartel, just given the amount of corruption that's down there. So realizing the amount of corruption, not just in their public officials, but also in their security elements, it's really difficult to ascertain whether or not any discussion of security whatsoever is actually going to be effective.
This gentleman right here. Sorry, okay.
Representative Raymond, what gives you hope that Texas lawmakers will do the right thing for Texas relative to border security?
Say that again?
I don't think it's on, Clint.
Yeah.
What gives you hope that Texas lawmakers will do the right thing relative to border security?
Well, it depends what you think. Your definition of right thing, right? But she asked, what do I think the legislature would do, whether we do the right thing with reference to border security. Look, I think we're trying. And again, it's partly a sense of frustration, right? And there's a big divide between Democrats and Republicans, and some folks that come and testify, as you mentioned, like on state affairs, you'll have people come and just blast a proposal. And I say, well, we've got problems going on, so if you want to be against something, but I've always said, man, I get pushed back on this. If you tell me that this is not the right thing to do, if you know it's not the right thing, then tell me what is the right thing. If this is not the way to solve the problem, then if you know that this isn't the way to do it, then why don't you, if you know what is not the right way, then you must know what is a good way. At least give us some idea, because we got to do something. We have to do more, right, to prevent, hopefully to prevent illegal immigration. But again, I think that's largely going to be driven at the national level. To really have an impact there, it's going to be at the national level. It just does. I think we can do more with reference to crime and drug interdictions and human smuggling and all. And I've supported legislation. Again, not a lot of Democrats did, but I was like, guys, we've got to do more to penalize those that are doing human smuggling. The penalties have to be, they got to hurt, because if they know they're going to be in prison longer, they'll pull back on it. That's just the way that'll work. It's a deterrent, and I believe that. So I think that I don't know what the right thing is. I can tell you that it's going to continue to be an issue in the legislature because we have such a big border. I may like some of the ideas, I may not like some of the other ideas, but we're going to do something. Whether or not it passes your test of the right thing, I don't know, but something's going to pass. We're going to keep passing some things, and that's why I tell my colleagues, especially if you know something's going to pass, work. If the votes are there to pass it, then work in massaging it to make it more effective. And that's why I ask these witnesses that get up there and just blast us. I said, well, okay, well then how would you do it? How would you change this? How would you stop human smuggling? What would you do? And then they never give us a damn thing, They never say anything.
There has been a great deal of discussion with regard to personnel that can be used along the border, law enforcement personnel. Have we given up completely on building more wall? I hadn't heard anything about that, and I thought, it takes a lot fewer personnel if you have a sufficient wall and use technology, and also use personnel to cover those areas a lot more effectively if you have more wall.
Yeah, so I'm really, me personally, I'm really not for building a wall, a Great Wall of China. I mean, I'm not. I don't think. Well, again, we can disagree. If you think that, go ahead and keep advocating for it. And there are structures being built. I get that. You're asking me, do I think it's going to continue? I mean, certainly Republicans generally support it, right, and have majorities in the Texas legislature and in the U.S. House. And so, I mean, there's still going to be some effort to do that, but I think it takes away from the bigger issue. I mean, why people are coming in the first place? And I think we can do a better job of changing all the dynamic of illegal immigration, illegal drugs. We haven't talked about this. Let me get into this for a second. That's right. They are invited. They're invited by U.S. citizens, right? But again, I think we should. Oh no. Well, what about all the people that are getting jobs hired by? Are there not millions? Are there millions? Are there millions? Are there millions of people being hired illegally? Yes, probably is very probable. That's right. And so, in any event, I think that we can do things more effectively than a wall. But it's a respectful disagreement. You want a wall, you be for it. I don't think that's the best way to get there. I don't think that's the best way to invest the money to make it effective long term. That's the way I feel about it, right? Let me say this very quickly about drugs. Again, all the drugs that are coming here, you all know that studies have been done by a lot of different U.S. organizations, right, that show about 70% of all the illegal drugs consumed in the world are consumed by United States citizens. And so if we don't do more, if we don't figure out how to do more about that, then those drugs are coming, because that money is big. I've said this, I finally said it last year in one of the hearings. I said, guys, believe me, I'm not for the cartels. I don't try to antagonize them because I live too damn close to them. But I'm not for them, right? That's not a joke, guys. That's not a joke. I can't tell you everything I do know, but I tell them when you look at Pablo Escobar, you know what made him a billionaire? Green. The color of the money was green. El Chapo in Mexico, you know the color of the money? On occasion, when they let cameras go in on these stash houses of money, it's all U.S. dollars. They're all U.S. dollars stacked up, millions, right? So we have to recognize that we are welcoming, inviting illegal immigration, and we're inviting drugs because we consume so much in this country. I can tell you that I've never used illegal drugs, but again, if I ask for a show of hands, and you want to be honest, I'll just say, let me just close it with this. I passed a bill allowing judges to go hold court in schools and sentence. We started in Laredo. So we go to a high school, it's a gym full of students, and you bring in two or three defendants who have agreed to do this. They've already been found guilty on a drug charge. And the judge is there to sentence them. So it's an official court proceeding, and they sentence them, and then he adjourns, or he or she adjourns, and then they ask me to say a few words or whatever about this. We wanted the defendants to tell all these young people, don't do what I did, don't end up, I'm going to jail, you don't want to go to jail. Anyway, I asked this question, I said, raise your hand, and I want you to listen to me closely, raise your hand if you know anyone, a friend, a brother, a sister, a cousin, who has used illegal drugs, if you know anyone. All the hands go up. All of them. That's incredible, guys. That's incredible. And I'm not asking them, how many of you guys use drugs, right? I'm saying, I'd make it nice. I say, raise your hand if you know someone. And all the hands go up. And I said, we've got to change that dynamic.
Yeah, just a caveat off that real quick. As it stands, so Texas has 1,254 miles. The majority of that, over 90% of that, those 1,254 miles on the border, is private property. So right now, my last position in the Border Patrol, I was the public lands liaison agent. I was part of the border team, the border wall team. And so I was working hand in hand with the state as they were building Trump's wall along the same the same track that Trump was building his. So in certain regions along that track, Texas is building it. Now, unfortunately, for the majority of Texas, we still don't know who, what, where, why, how, or when anything is coming across. So when it comes to the drugs that our representative is talking about that is making a havoc across our communities, we have no idea how they're coming across between the ports of entry. We do not have that domain awareness. So we agree in our research we're showing that based off of the terrain and based off of the lack of technology and understanding of the domain awareness between the ports of entry, we still don't know what is coming across and who's bringing it. And so we're advocating for more technology to be placed there when it can be, and then more barriers to be placed there where it can be based off of the terrain and also the current laws in terms of private property rights.
But we also know, by the way, it's a delicate deal, man, to talk about this stuff, but here we are, so I'll talk about it. But I've dealt with federal law enforcement enough to know, and sort of common sense also, we do know where a lot of the drugs are coming through. They're coming through our they're going through our checkpoints, right? And so you can say that our guys at the checkpoints are doing a really bad job, or you also know that periodically they will arrest and convict some of our law enforcement officers for being on the take. They say, hey, pass it 3 p.m. on this day, or pass it 2 a.m. on this day, and you'll be good. I pass every week. So I go to the border checkpoint every week. I go through there every week, and I'm watching this stuff, right? But we know that a lot of the drugs come in through legal points of entry because some of our guys are not only not doing their job, but worse, right?
And we have time for one more question, but sir, I'll caveat that the Texas Facilities Commission, who's in charge of building the state wall, if you visit their website, they have regular updates as to how much they've built and where it's been built as well, that they update pretty regularly. Clint, I think we have one more.
Thank you. So there is a material. I know, Representative, you're not in favor of this type of a deterrent, but it is like Newt Gingrich. It is a deterrent. It's called TerraBlock by HESCO. It's a material that GSA has approved, and it's used by the military. It's not a capital cost pay, but but you do pay interest over time, and it can be financed. The material, I'm just asking you to look into it, is impenetratable. So rather than putting up the razor wire, perhaps what we need is a deterrent that people will not be able to break the barrier. You can't drive through it. You can't blow through it. It's something that is sort of an indestructible type of a material that's available and approved through GSA. So I'm just asking you to
You mean like
look
for
into.
a wall, you mean, or what?
Yes, sir. It's called TerraBlock by HESCO.
TerraBlock, okay.
Yes, yeah.
Well, if they're going to, I mean,
Thank you.
Look, I'm not for the wall, but if you're going to build one, then make it as good as you can. I'm not going to fight you on that.
Thank you, everybody. Before we close out, I just want to give our guests a chance to do final remarks. So I encourage you, as we approach the next legislative session, keep your eye out for all of those bills. And if you have questions and you want to know if a bill has been filed on a specific topic, you can always reach out to the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and we'll point out those types of bills that you're looking for. Representative, is there one bill specifically to secure our state and our borders that you want our audience to be on the lookout for coming the next session?
Well, again, I think we're very likely to continue, Operation Lone Star, and I think that we will have legislation. I hope to be part of it, and if we're going to do it, I've always said, if we're going to do something, then let's do it right, and let's make it most effective as we can make it, and so you've heard me say, if nothing else, I think you know where I come from, that I think we ought to have law enforcement. If we're going to spend money, invest money on that, that'll be law enforcement officers. I think that would be better spent and more effective. And so we're going to talk about potentially a department that is very specifically focused on that. I will say this for the record. I think it, and I know, Ryan, we can talk about it, but I think that I like the head of DPS being in charge of that, even if it's a new department within DPS, but that you have, you've got the head of DPS in Department of Public Safety in charge of that department. And just like you have the head of DPS and you've got the Texas Rangers, there's someone who's in charge of the Texas Rangers, but they report to the head of DPS. I would like to keep it that way with reference to if we're going to have a specific department dealing with Homeland Security or dealing with border security. I think we're going to keep calling it Homeland Security, but that's where it stays. I think that you need that. And in my view right now, I think Steve McCraw is the best. I think he's great. He may not be there for the next 25 years, but however long he's there, I think we're lucky. And I think he's the guy we need to make sure that department is being run the right way.
Thank you, sir. Ammon, final thought. If there's one research topic you want our audience to look out for from TPPF, what would that be?
It would probably be the border force research. Just to caveat off this, there's been a lot of talks, whether that's in media or here even in terms of thousands or millions of people coming across the border, but not a lot of talks, and you're talking about the criminality, but not a lot of talk about how to deal with foreign terrorist organizations. How do they operate inside the United States? How do insurgents operate overseas, and how do they operate here in the United States on the border and in every one of your communities? Now, how do we conduct counter-terrorism? How do we conduct counterinsurgency? How do we conduct any of this in terms of a hybrid threat environment? And unfortunately, through our research, we showed that DPS, as a law enforcement agency, does not have the doctrine, organization, training, or the understanding or the manpower to do so. So we, through this border force, we are suggesting that it goes under a Department of Homeland Security, a Texas Department of Homeland Security, and not under a state law enforcement agency itself. But that assessment that I'm talking about, it's going to be the first ever and most comprehensive analysis of every single threat that is emanating from our border. No other agency has done it. DHS refuses to do it. The Department of Defense hasn't done one since 2011, when Asymmetric Warfare Group conducted a study on how to wipe out the Zetas and also how to wipe out Sinaloa and secure our border. But nothing has been done since then. We have been left, our law enforcement is outgunned, outmanned, and outfunded, and we've been left now as citizens to deal with this situation. And so we're going to show exactly how the threats, not only who they are, but how they operate, not just south of the border, not just at the border, now in every one of you guys' communities.
So a lot to look out for from Texas policy. Again, stay in touch with us as we move forward and we get ready to continue to defend Texas moving into the next legislative session. Thank you guys for joining us. Thank you for joining us online. And we look forward to continuing speaking with you on these topics.
Thank you.